A fitness tracker asks you for almost nothing. You strap it on, maybe punch in your height and weight once during setup, and that's it. It just starts working. You never tell it where you live. You never tell it whether you're sick. You never tell it what you did last night. And yet, a device that only ever collects a heart rate signal, a motion trace of an accelerometer, and a string of GPS coordinates can end up knowing a surprising amount about all three of those things. I spend a lot of my time pulling wearables and their companion apps apart, because the gap between what a device measures and what it ends up knowing is where most of the interesting privacy questions actually live. This isn't a conspiracy story. It's just what happens when raw sensor data gets run through pattern matching software. And once you understand the mechanism, you stop being vaguely afraid of your watch and start knowing exactly where the line between measured and inferred actually sits. Strip a modern tracker down, and there are only a handful of physical sensors doing any of the work. There's a light-based sensor pressed against your skin that shines light through it and watches how it bounces back, which is how the device estimates your heart rate from blood flow. There's an accelerometer and a gyroscope measuring motion and orientation. There's a GPS chip for location, sometimes a barometric altimeter for elevation, and on newer devices, a skin temperature sensor. That's 5 sensors, maybe 6 on the fancier models. And every single inference the device ever makes about you traces back to some combination of that short list. None of those sensors record the sentence "you went for a run" or the sentence "you're stressed out today." They record voltages. They record light reflectance over time. They record tiny changes in acceleration along 3 axes, sampled dozens of times a second. That's it. That's the entire raw output of the hardware on your wrist. And by itself, it's about as meaningful as static. You could hand a technician a raw file of that data with no metadata attached, and they'd have no idea whether you were asleep, jogging, or sitting in traffic. The inference happens after that in software somewhere between your wrist and the app on your phone. A classifier that's been trained on a huge pile of labeled data looks at this motion pattern plus this heart rate plus this cadence and decides that the combination equals running. A sleep staging algorithm looks at how still you are combined with how your heart rate is varying and guesses whether you're in light sleep, deep sleep, or REM sleep. None of those labels are things you told the device. They are outputs of a model applied to signals you generated just by existing with the thing strapped to your wrist. This matters because the gap between the raw signal and the inferred label is exactly where the privacy risk lives. The company that made your tracker isn't just quietly storing a line that says heart rate 72 beats per minute, 2:32 p.m. It's storing, and usually has a strong business incentive to compute and keep, a much richer derived profile. Your resting heart rate trend over the last 6 months, your typical sleep window, how consistent your exercise habits actually are. Patterns that look a lot like stress. That derived layer is worth more. It's more sensitive, and it's a lot less obviously covered by whatever consent screen you tap through in about 4 seconds during setup. GPS tracking is probably the clearest example of an inference nobody explicitly signs up for. You turn location on because you want your runs, distance, and pace logged accurately. Fair enough, but what you've also generated, without ever meaning to, is a set of coordinates that start in the same place and end in the same place most days of the week. A system doesn't need you to type in "this is my house" to notice that 80% of your recorded activities begin and end inside the same 50-meter circle at roughly the same time every morning. Run that pattern for 3 weeks and the address is basically solved. This isn't a hypothetical. Back in 2018, an aggregated public heat map built from Strava's user activity data ended up revealing the layout and staffing patterns of military bases and forward operating sites in parts of the world where the personnel wearing fitness trackers were effectively the only people generating GPS traces in that area at all. Nobody involved set out to disclose the perimeter of a base. The inference came entirely from stacking up movement data that looked completely harmless, one person at a time, each runner just logging a morning loop around what turned out to be a perimeter fence. That lesson generalizes way past anything military. Any location trail that's dense enough and consistent enough reveals a home address, a workplace, a place of worship, or a route you run every single week, whether or not the app ever once asked you to type that information in directly. The app doesn't need your address. Your habits hand it over for free, usually inside the first month of ownership. Most trackers now guess your activity type instead of making you select it from a menu, and that guess is a classifier making its best call based on the rhythm of your accelerometer and the shape of your heart rate curve. It's usually trained to recognize a fixed list, things like walking, running, cycling, swimming, weight training, straightforward stuff, mostly, but several fitness platforms have shipped classifiers that flag a sustained elevated heart rate paired with a specific rhythmic motion signature as sexual activity, and then log that straight into your exercise history right alongside your morning jog. This became a real public talking point because plenty of users had no idea their device was even capable of drawing that inference, let alone storing it in the same dataset as everything else about them, timestamped and synced to the cloud within minutes. The same underlying mechanism shows up in less obviously sensitive places too. A period tracking integration that logs basal body temperature and cycle timing can, combined with a missed expected cycle and a temperature shift of even half a degree, produce a pregnancy inference before the user has told a single other person, sometimes before they've even confirmed it to themselves. That's not the device reading your mind. It's a pattern match running quietly in the background, doing arithmetic on numbers you never once looked at yourself. Researchers studying wearable data during disease outbreaks have shown something similar. Shifts in resting heart rate and skin temperature can precede symptom onset by a day or more, which means a device can flag that something is off about your body before you consciously feel it yourself. None of these are things you typed in anywhere. They are outputs of models running continuously on data you generated just by wearing the thing on your wrist in the background, all day, every day. The inference problem gets a lot bigger once you follow where the data goes after it's created. Most trackers sync to a companion app. The app syncs to a cloud account, and the company running that cloud account has a business model. And for a lot of wearable makers, that model includes ad services, sharing data with corporate wellness or insurance partners who offer premium discounts for participation, or letting connected third-party apps pull your data through an API once you've granted access one time and mostly forgotten about it, sometimes years earlier. Here's a fact worth knowing, not a legal opinion, just a fact about how the categories were drawn up. Health data collected directly by a consumer fitness app is often not covered by the health privacy frameworks people assume protect it. In the United States, protections like HIPAA are built around interactions with covered entities, hospitals, insurers, that kind of thing, not around a wristband syncing quietly to a phone app. That's a structural leftover from rules written decades before wearables existed, not a statement about what ought to happen. Go read your tracker's privacy policy and search for the word aggregated or the phrase de-identified. You'll usually find a carve-out in there that allows that specific category of data to be shared or sold a lot more freely than data that's directly tied to your name. It's worth 5 minutes of your time just to see it written down in the company's own language, not mine. Wearable data has also shown up as evidence in criminal and civil proceedings, including cases where a tracker's step count and heart rate log directly contradicted a person's own account of where they were and what they were doing at a specific hour on a specific date. I'm not bringing that up to give you legal advice or to tell you what to do about it. I'm bringing it up because it's a concrete illustration of a general point. Data that exists can be requested through a legal process, and I never told anyone is not the same thing as nobody has a record of it. Imingsees love to describe shared or sold fitness data as anonymized, meaning your name and account ID get stripped out before the data ever leaves their systems. Anonymizing data does genuinely reduce risk, that part's real. But a location trail plus a sleep schedule plus a resting heart rate pattern is often specific enough to identify one single person again once it gets cross-referenced against even one other dataset, like a home address list or a workplace directory. This is a well-studied problem in data science generally. It's not unique to any one vendor, and it's exactly why it's anonymized shouldn't be read as it can't be traced back to me. None of this means fitness trackers are a lost cause, and it definitely doesn't mean you should throw yours in a drawer. It means treating the inference layer as the actual product here, not the step count on the little screen. The step count was never really the point, and it never was. A few things are genuinely within your control, and they're worth actually doing rather than just nodding along to. Check what your tracker's app is sharing with connected third-party services and disconnect the ones you don't actually use anymore. Most people have 2 or 3 of these hanging around from an app they tried once a couple of years back and forgot about, still pulling data on a schedule nobody remembers setting. Look for a setting that limits or fully turns off ad personalization tied to your health data specifically. It's usually buried a few menus deep and it's rarely on by default in your favor. Use coarser GPS logging or turn location off entirely for routes that start and end at your own front door, if that particular inference is the one that actually bothers you. And read the data sharing section of the privacy policy instead of just the marketing page with the nice photos of people running on a beach. It takes 10 minutes and it tells you more about what actually happens to your data than any amount of guessing. None of these steps make you untraceable, and I want to be straight with you about that, because that's not a claim anyone honest can make about a single setting change. No one setting and no one app substitute makes the underlying inference problem disappear entirely. What these steps do is shrink the amount of derived, sensitive data sitting in someone else's system, and that's a realistic goal, useful on its own terms, even when perfect privacy was never actually on the table. If you want the fuller version of this kind of thing, we run tool tests and step-by-step guides that tell you exactly what a piece of privacy tech actually protects you from, and just as importantly, what it doesn't. The full guides and tool tests are at theprivacywire.com, so go take a look and subscribe if you want more of them.